Okay, we are live, and we will start here in just a minute or two. This is Rick Levine, and I'm here with Steve. Here in just a minute or two. Oh, wait, I got to turn my volume down on this. Rick Levine, and I'm here. Hold on one second. This is the Mercury retrograde. I got to turn my volume down on this.
I think I better do the same. No, I'm good. Yeah, Mercury retrograde, folks. This is just for the last 2-minute preamble before we actually jump in.
Yeah, if you have a browser open, Steve, you need to turn the volume off on that also. That's what was going on here.
No, I've got everything off apart from the stream.
If you have a browser open, Steve, you need to turn the volume off on that also. That's what was going on here. It's apparently still going on here.
Bear with us, folks.
All right, I think we're good now. All right, let's start this all over. Well, actually, we're good because it's still only 6:57, and we're not starting officially until 7 o'clock Seattle time, noon Hobart, Tasmania time. And what is that, 3 a.m. Or is it 4 a.m. in London? One of those.
3 a.m. in London.
So, yes. People are logging on. Feel free, whether you're on the YouTube page on Steve's channel or the YouTube page on my channel, feel free to say hi and to tell us where you're from. That is all coming in. We can see people here from Jamaica and from Baltimore, Maryland, and from Michigan. And someone says, I'm in your neighborhood, Rick. And I see David Palmer, Leo King. Hey, David. Always nice to see you.
Coming in from Mexico, from Ecuador, from New Zealand, Tasmania, Sydney, Phoenix, Florida, London. Can't keep up. Welcome. We hope you like it.
All right. So we are now at 6:59. I'm actually not going to start the official, even though we're live streaming, and hopefully people are figuring out how this all works and everything. On separate channels, we are live streaming to 2 separate channels simultaneously. And with a little luck now, I'm going to do the official opening. And with that, on behalf of Steve and myself, I'd like to welcome you all here. And I think it's time to bring us up. There we are. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Rick.
So maybe people don't know this, but you and I have never met. We've emailed. We've had a couple of fairly quick conversations. And although there's a huge number of your very loyal followers who think that we got together because you reached out to me and I never followed up and never contacted you back, that's not the truth, but it's an okay myth.
Yeah, legends. For the first few years, I just thought you were an AI construct.
Yeah, I still may be. I'm not worried about AI anymore. The thing that concerns me is something that people will begin hearing about in the next months ahead, and that is ASI, which is instead of artificial intelligence, it's artificial superintelligence. And that is the next piece that will become a buzzword, because that's when artificial intelligence begins to replicate itself. And we'll see what happens. Anyhow, how are you doing? You're in Hobart, Tasmania, instead of your hometown in the UK.
I am. I came here for a couple of my best friends' weddings a couple of days ago. And as you can see, I came with all the proper equipment. And yeah, great. And I flew in a few days ago. I'm flying back in a couple of days' time. It's the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. I'm doing a live stream with you. I mean, what better way? And it's Mercury retrograde. And the alternative is sitting at home and watching daytime television and doing nothing. This is real astrology, jumping at opportunities.
And the opportunity here is one that will not only unfold like a new moon unfolds over the course of a couple of weeks. This is an opportunity that will unfold over the next 6-7 years as the Jupiter moves towards its opposition to and I see that Gail, hey, Mimi from Dubai, friend of mine from Dubai. Gail is randomly just showing some of the comments that are coming in. They're coming in so fast, we can't show them all, but there are people who are just, expressing their gratitude for being here. And, and that's very, very, very cool. So let's actually, we have a lot of material to cover and some things that are going to be a lot of fun to talk about. But what I'd like to do, Steve, is I would like to actually bring up the chart, which is actually a chart for just a few minutes from now. This will be a chart at 26 minutes after the hour, whatever hour it is, depending upon your time zone. There's David saying, blows my mind that you both haven't connected until now. We're not going to correct your typo on connected, David. But this Jupiter-Uranus makes sense. So pleased to have you here. The work that you do is really great. You attract such a different audience than I think that us old guys attract. And it's great because so many people are getting into astrology around the world. This is the chart for the exact perfection of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, which, although it's an every 14-year cycle, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, this one is extraordinarily different for so many reasons. And when you look at this chart, Steve, what is it that you see? Why is this moment such an incredible turning point for all of us?
From my perspective, Rick, it's because when you look at the pace of evolution that's happened just in the last 40 or 50 years, 60 years ago, when I was 8 years old, telephones were a little thing on the wall with a ringtone, and televisions were little boxes with black and white. And look how far we've come in 60 years, 2 generations of people compared to the last 40 or 50 generations. The advancement of technology, spirituality, and population as well is pointing us on an accelerating graph curve of rushing us into some type of very imminent breakthrough point of the future, I hope. And this is a symbolic moment. This moment right now has the potential to seed the long-term future.
And as does the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction every 14 years, but this one is different for a lot of reasons. Some of them have to do with, from the mid-1960s, the Uranus-Pluto conjunction that then turned into the Uranus-Pluto square in the 2010s that had so much social dynamic energy that are moving to the Uranus-Pluto trine once Pluto moves into Gemini. We'll get there in a few minutes, but that's why this particular conjunction is more overwhelmingly significant than any that we've experienced prior.
Yeah, totally agree, Rick. And also, we must also not forget, we've got to make a nod to the mythology of this, because Jupiter and Pluto are both brothers. One took the underworld, one took the overworld. One is in the dark, one's in the light, biggest and smallest, but they're both the grandsons of Uranus. So
yes,
there's a connection.
There is a connection, and I think it's important also to understand that in many ways, Uranus is the quantum planet, meaning that it's the thing that shattered our brains and made us realize that what we thought was the real world, that is, the planets out to Saturn, was not, that there was an entire invisible universe. And Uranus, as the planet of the unexpected, as the planet that has to do with shock and electrical, the lightning goes off in a way this is the particle wave duality that, yes, we're points in space, but we're also trajectories in time at the same moment.
And I think you're going to find that because of the charts you're going to show about the late 1700s at the moment, at the time of Uranus's discovery, that was like a seed moment, a sprout breaking through the surface, which now is the flowering of that moment.
So, Steve, if you had to describe the nature of Jupiter just in a few words, what would be some of the words that you might, want people to think about?
I mean, on the negative side, it's about overreaching, overstretching, overindulgence, and greed. On the neutral side, it's about growth and expansion and amplification. And on the positive side, it's about optimism, humor, faith, and a positive mental attitude for the future.
So wherever Jupiter is, it's like a magnifying lens.
Yeah.
And
it's amplifying Uranian energy right now.
And it's magnifying, that's right. And it's magnifying the Uranian energy. Now, here's the thing. You and I talked about this briefly before we went live. And that is, in modern astrology, the planet that's associated with Aquarius is Uranus. And
yes.
the conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus is occurring just as Pluto has begun its first in 250-year run through the sign of Aquarius. And this is huge.
It's absolutely massive, because the last time anything like this happened, the outer planets hadn't been discovered. And whilst they were still there, they were only affecting us in a way that was unconscious, unknown about. And now we've got all these new archetypes we can work with just in this last 200, 250 years. And with Pluto just in this last 100 years. That's revolutionizing not only our way of thinking, but our way of developing these concepts into the world we live in. An amazing time to be alive.
And the last time, I mean, people have been saying, oh, Jupiter conjoins Uranus every 14 years. It does. But the last time that Jupiter conjoined Uranus, when Pluto was in Uranus's modern home sign of Aquarius, was here at this chart. We can see that Jupiter and Uranus are conjunct at 3.5 degrees of Leo. And the date on this is the summer of 1789. What was going on?
You tell me. You're on that side of the pond. You tell me.
Well, this is like a week before the storming of the Bastille. This is the turning point in the French Revolution, which is the first time that it was demonstrated that groups of people could join together and overthrow the God-given structures of royal families that basically owned countries and people. I mean, it was huge from that standpoint.
The catchphrase at that time was liberty, equality, fraternity. And if those words don't summarize the recent invention, the discovery of Uranus at that time, what else does?
And added to that, that is the same year, that spring, and these conjunctions, if we look at Rick Tarnas's work, which I have a copy here of Cosmos and Psyche, which is the kind of encyclopedic study of these outer planets and how their cycles impact the development of mundane, that's worldwide events. The thing, Rick allows a 10 to 15 degree orb, which means that with these cycles, we're talking 6 months to a year before and after, where this zeitgeist is condensing this seed period. And it's important to understand, as we look at this conjunction of Jupiter and Uranus with Pluto in Aquarius in 1789, the first United States Congress, the first session of Congress, was formed and met starting in the spring of 1789. And in 1789, although the revolution, the American Revolution, was 14 years prior, and actually the previous conjunction was in June of 1775, we see Jupiter and Uranus conjunct in Gemini. Well, this is the turning point of the American Revolution against England. In fact, April of 1775 was the Battle of Saratoga, my hometown, where Benedict Arnold, who later turned traitor, beat up General Johnny Burgoyne. And so this conjunction actually feeds the ratification of the United States Constitution.
But I'd like to add something here. Both of those charts you've just shown have the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction at 3 degrees Gemini and then at 3 or 4 degrees of Leo. And with all the stuff that's coming up at 3 or 4 degrees of the masculine signs over the coming few years, this adds to what I've already suggested, that this time of the late 1700s was a seeding time for humanity, which the flowering is literally about to develop right now.
Yeah, yeah. I remember Terence McKenna once say that if an alien came to Earth for the first time during this latter part of the first part of the 21st century, and they judged humanity based upon these days, it would be like an alien seeing a human being, a woman giving birth, and judging humanity at that moment because of the intensity, the volatility, the constriction and expansion all happening at the same time, that a lot of the compression that we're feeling, a lot of the conflict is really, we're stuck in the birth canal right now.
Absolutely. Someone else has just commented that Australia was invaded and colonized during the same period of the late 1700s. So this is a global phenomenon. And when you think that this was happening in the UK at this time, this was the advent of it. This is the start of technology. You got the birth of people like Faraday, the developer of electricity. It's not the Industrial Revolution, but it's the birth of the people who powered the Industrial Revolution. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's also during this period of time is when Benjamin Franklin flew the kite, which I think is actually what he made his son do it, but that's different. But it was the awareness that the technology of what Faraday would later and other people would later think about as electricity, Galvani, and so on, that it actually was something that existed in nature, that lightning was the same force that made our nervous system fire its impulses.
And is an analogy that takes us back into the mythology again, because in the Norse myth, Zeus represents Thor, and Thor would hold his hammer up and the lightning would come down into his hammer and flow through him into the ground. He was the god of thunder. Yeah. So there's a strong Jupiter-Uranus connection there as well.
So at every Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, and this one really plays back to the origin of the birth of independence from the authoritative power structures. And if anything, here in the United States, all around the world, we're seeing this same death and rebirth of the fundamental underpinnings of democracy, the Constitution of the United States, which was ratified at a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, is again under the same kind of upheaval as Pluto at the beginning of its 20-year cycle moving through Aquarius. So, yeah, and people here saying that it's formation New Zealand in the late 1780s also, so yeah, I mean, it was a tremendous period of time that we're resonating to. Now, before we move on, are there any other more recent events that you can think of, Steve, that were either breakthroughs of either in art or music or politics or social, from the Jupiter-Uranus cycle itself?
What, you were talking about the 1700s or more recently?
No, I'm talking about anywhere more recent, just to give people a flavor of some of the other things that, have occurred, if anything comes to mind.
Well, there was a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, I think, in 1941. And that was the moment that the wave of the Nazi invasion of Europe kind of faltered, just when they were trying to cross the Channel into England. And that was the start of the kickback. And then there was a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in 1955, coincidentally the year I was born. And my generation, I think, of a generation who opened a lot of doors for people who were younger than us to step into those doors. So in many ways, the Jupiter-Uranus, it opens new doors. It doesn't necessarily go through them, but it opens new doors for future exploration. It's a sign of, this is not Saturnine. This is not about structuring the past. This is about exploring the future and alchemizing the future, turning the future from latent into potent.
Yeah, I always think of Saturn until the discovery of Uranus. Saturn was the limit. It was the outward circumference. There was nothing past Saturn. In fact, in William Blake's mythology, and William Blake wrote, he was born 1757, so he was basically, coming into his, adulthood around that time and through the following conjunction after this. But he created a whole mythology, and one of his gods was the god called Urizen, Urizen, which is really a play on your reason, because Blake said you couldn't use logic to get into the realms of imagination. Think Saturn trying to become Neptune. Something has to happen. And that something that happened was the striking of the Uranian energy that basically shattered the crystalline authority boundaries of Saturn. That is, it's the wake-up call. It's Uranus, the awakener.
It's the wake-up call, exactly. And then, of course, move it forward from the mid-50s into the late 60s, and you got the chart of a 69 Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, because that was awesome in so many different ways.
All right, that chart, well, hold on a second. That chart is now the chart that is showing. And this is a chart that, rather than timed for the exact moment, this is about a half an hour to an hour after the perfected conjunction. But you can see here that Jupiter is at 0 degrees of Libra, 47 minutes, and Uranus at 0 degrees Libra, 42 minutes. And look, the moon is conjuncting them. And the reason why I picked this moment is this is the moment that humans, Neil Armstrong, stepped onto the moon, which in some ways is a symbolic representation of everything that unfolded in the years to come, because this is basically the loss of gravity. This is we've escaped the structure, and now what we could once only imagine, that would be Neptune, by a stroke of lightning, all of a sudden now is part of our consciousness.
It's also, I know the space race and the space age started in the late 50s and early 60s, but I suggest that this chart is the actual maturity of the space age. It is the first time we set foot on anything outside of planet Earth.
Yeah.
There are always people who will say the moon landing was a lie, but I choose not to believe that.
And and there are people who say, no, we landed on the moon, but what we saw on TV was Stanley Kubrick. Whatever. The point here, though, is that aside from just this moment of being so important, there were other cultural things that were cooking that became a seed, because really what we call the 60s really happened in the late 60s and early 70s.
Yeah. This was the time when Hendrix was dying, the Beatles were splitting up. It was the end of the golden age of acid. And it was this is where commercialism of the alternative scene began to start raising its ugly head, unfortunately. And it led, this is the start of a period that led into a kind of cultural decline for a time, which is why the sort of Jupiter-Uranus opposition of the mid-70s, which produced punk, was such a strong reaction to that, I think.
Yeah. So where do we want to go here? From here? You decide.
Well, I think we should look at a number of the prominent people and countries that the current Jupiter-Uranus is hitting, because there's a lot of them, and we're already 20 in. We've only got about another 40 minutes, 45 minutes, hour to go. So go ahead, take the lead, talk to us. Well, okay, I'm just going to fire off a few things. The Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is exactly on top of the sun of the British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. It's opposite Joe Biden's Mercury. It's square Vladimir Putin's Pluto on the midheaven in Leo, precisely. It's very close to the sun of both Israel and Palestine, and with Pluto in the sky squaring the sun of Netanyahu and Ali Khamenei. One's got 29 Libra, one's got 29 Aries. It's a time of massive change. And there's so many other people. I'm at a loss for words at the moment. It's not only the politicians. There's a number of inventors and corporate heads who have also. 21 Taurus is a big place for a lot of people in the world at the moment. And the old regimes, the old patterns, they're not crumbling. This is not a time of radical revolution. It's instead a time of boundaries changing from concrete and steel into rubber and elastic. It's time to bend the rules and start adapting to a rapidly emerging future, because otherwise we're going to become extinct.
Yeah, I don't think that is hyperbole. I think that is actually true. And actually, just coming back to the current chart for a quick moment here, this is the current, Jupiter-Uranus in Taurus. One of the things that a lot of people also have missed is the fact that while this conjunction is occurring, and while the sun is now squaring to Pluto, that Saturn is half square. I know a lot of people don't use these aspects, but man, once you start using them, you can't stop because they're so profound. But the sun is half square to Pluto, and Pluto is coming into a half square to, the sun is half square to Saturn, and Saturn is coming into a half square to Pluto. You can see these little finer orange lines, buried here behind. And the reason why this is so significant is that when you talk about boundaries changing, you're really talking about physical boundaries. You're talking about the power structure, the power that's Pluto, the transformation, not just lighthearted change, but deep metamorphosis, and Saturn being structure. And it was Saturn's conjunction to Pluto back, in January of 2020, its previous opposition to Pluto back around the World Trade Tower bombing, and even its conjunction to Pluto at the beginning of World War I and at the formation of Israel and the United Nations and the disappearance of Palestine. These are all Saturn-Pluto conjunctions or oppositions. And by May 6th, just a few weeks down the road, Saturn is going to be making its first exact half square to Pluto that'll go in and out of phase through next year. But this is another piece of that's feeding how important this particular Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is.
Also, I think that Saturn at the moment is happily, I'm glad to say, acting as a little bit of a brake on all of the potential manicness that's going on with the astrological world at the moment, just for a few months. It's not letting us gallop into the future, it's letting us trot, because not long from now, Saturn's going to leave Pisces and move into Aries with Neptune, and that is a whole different ballgame. At that point, we're going to be going exponentially fast, and we will talk about this within the next hour.
Yes, let's actually move this chart. Right now, we're at the conjunction. This is the seed, and we're actually 1 minute away from the perfected conjunction, because that is occurring 26 minutes after the hour, and it's now 25 minutes after the hour. And I would like to just back away from what we're talking about and just for a moment encourage everyone that's online in either of the two platforms to just think about where in their life they could go, would go, if they were not restrained by the three-dimensional world, and how over the hours, days, weeks ahead that we can each take little steps towards manifesting these impossible realms in our imagination. I mean, this is the time to plant the seed, even through physical ritual. It doesn't have to be exactly at this moment. Anyone who does any form of planetary magic knows that the moment of the conjunction is a void. And it's as the conjunction separates over the minutes, hours, and days after a slow-moving conjunction like this, that's the manifestation. It's not just about what we think of in this moment. The door is opening, like Noel says. The door is opening, but we need to walk through it. We need to do what we need to do in our individual lives to begin to manifest it.
To quote Terence, human history represents such a radical break to the systems of biological organization that preceded it, that it must be the response to some type of dwell point or attractor lying ahead in the temporal dimensions. There's a magnet in the future that's pulling us forward, that's urging us to evolve and accelerate, both mentally and consciously.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, yeah. Terence has said
to anything that's ever existed before. And
yeah. Carmela says manifest. And it's true. Yeah. So
at least from my end. No, we're good. Good to go. Yeah.
All right. And Bruce Springsteen, dream it and hope your ass follows. That's a good Bruce Springsteen line.
That's a great one.
One of the things to keep in mind, and now we'll kind of stretch a little bit into the future, and we're going to look at over the next month, Jupiter moves from Taurus, because Jupiter's moving pretty fast right now, and Jupiter moves into Gemini. And as Jupiter moves into Gemini, this is absolutely so significant, because as Jupiter moves into Gemini, it actually creates a trine to, here we're looking at the chart for June 2nd. This is just like, a month and a half down the road. And we can see now that Jupiter has moved into Gemini. But as any planet now moves into Gemini, including the Sun and Venus, which we'll do between now and then, Jupiter is going to pick up on a trine to Pluto. Now, remember, it was Jupiter's conjunction with Pluto, which were the three flowerings of the quarantine / pandemic / whatever the hell that all was. But Jupiter-Pluto brings the magnifying lens into the underworld and brings that stuff out. And we can see here that Neptune is just it's almost at 0 degrees Aries, but it doesn't go into Aries. It turns retrograde and backs up. But look at this little formation here. So I think we're going to be getting inklings of what's around the bend. And this becomes another piece in this longer term cycle that we have going.
Absolutely. And we're also talking about Jupiter amplifying the psychology of Pluto in Aquarius. And Pluto in Aquarius is calling us for all to develop beyond the limits of confined community, such as we've known it so far, and to start embracing the idea of a much more greater collective, particularly the ideas of tribe, out more than community and friend. A tribe is not limited by color or age or gender or locality. It's a global phenomenon. And Jupiter's amplifying our own capacity to psychoanalyze ourselves. And I also think it's beginning to spell the final death gasp of conventional and orthodox religion. As fundamentalism rises, so conventional religion decreases. And Jupiter trine Pluto is really telling us to find our own relationship with our own psychology, spirit, and the divine, however you see the divine as being.
Yes.
Just an idea.
No, that's all beautiful. And again, that Jupiter movement is also part of a foreshadowing of what is going to happen, as over the year following this, Jupiter touches into Gemini. And as it touches into Gemini, it doesn't quite reach the exact trine to Pluto before it turns retrograde in September of 2025, about a year and a quarter down the road. And you can see here that Uranus in Gemini is going to again make that trine to Pluto that Jupiter is going to be doing this summer. But this is a longer lasting trine that'll last for years as these two planets go direct, retrograde, direct, retrograde, direct. But even here, you can see that Saturn now has just tipped into Aries. It's retrograde back into Pisces. Jupiter is in Aries, and this conjunction is just about ready to unfold. And that conjunction will unfold, and it will be sextile this Uranus-Pluto trine. And here we have the next door opening that's even a larger door than the one we're at. Go ahead, Steve.
This is something that's never happened in human history before.
I agree.
And this is in many ways, I see this as a kind of conclusion of the human experiment. It's a doorway into an expanded perceptive field of a higher dimensional breakthrough, not one where we lose our identity or individuality, but one where we learn to dance more with words like empathy and compassion and kindness, and especially our relationship to the environment. But to have all of the outer planets moving from feminine into masculine signs is going to bring a massive reordering of our own concepts of gender stereotyping and of the way we govern our own lives. This is the biggest time of revolution in human history.
Yeah, and just to clarify that a step further, Pluto moving from feminine Capricorn into masculine, feminine masculine, not boy girl. It's yin yang. But Pluto moving into yang or externalizing right hand, left brained Aquarius. Saturn and Neptune moving from water yin Pisces into masculine or yang Aries. Uranus moving from Taurus into Gemini. And then we'll get to this chart in just a moment as Jupiter moves. Now we're having it moving into Gemini, but before this is over, Jupiter will move into Leo, and we'll look at that chart in just a moment. And this is a huge reordering. And I've looked back 2,500 years and have not found anything that is on the order of what we're coming into here. We're not talking in hyperbole. This is extraordinary, and it feels like it, but we don't even have the ability to really understand what it's going to be.
It's going to be different. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be innovative, and it's going to change everything. And so the only way you can actually work with this is to dance with it. Because if you try and stick to the old safe methods, you're going to become redundant and extinct.
Now, I would, just because we're still at the point of this conjunction unfolding, I'd like to share a post from Sunny, because I agree with this, and that is, I wish we could take a moment of silence to deeply connect with the 2,000 plus, there's more than that, people that are gathered here now to embody this moment, because it's when people get together and experience something in the moment together, there's something that oversteps the bounds of Saturn, space, and time, and basically creates that instantaneity. And I think that while we're doing this, not just to shine lights, thank you, Sunny, for shining this light, but not just to shine light, to be also aware that in our moment of silence, we can also acknowledge how many people on the planet do not have the opportunity that the couple of thousand of us do right now, because they're living in tents or because they've lost family members due to catastrophic destruction, government craziness, and the leftovers of colonialism, greed, nationalism, and so on. And so just want to acknowledge that, and just give just a few moments of silence where we can just all realize that we here are creating a moment and a sense of community.
And that is exactly why words like compassion, empathy, and kindness, if they're not part of the human future, what kind of future is it going to be?
Yeah. So The last chart I want to look at here is a chart that most astrologers have already projected into looking at a little bit. But again, I've never, ever seen, I keep looking at this chart or ones with days, weeks before and after it, because it keeps going in and out of focus. But let me just explain what's happening here, and then I'll let Steve take the ball and run with it, because in the summer of 2026, that's just a couple years down the road, we will have Uranus making an exact perfected trine with Pluto. Now, remember, in the 60s, that was a Uranus-Pluto conjunction that seeded this larger cycle. And in the 2010s, that square brought everything from the 60s back into focus, whether it was legalized gay marriage, whether it was use of recreational drugs, whether it was protesting on the streets, whether it was civil rights, whether it was ecology. I mean, all these issues were back in our face again. But we're coming into a trine where this energy is flowing. And now we have Neptune exactly. I mean, we're partile at the midpoint, sextiling Pluto on one side and Uranus on the other, while Jupiter, the fastest moving of these three it's the fastest moving of these four slow moving planets. Saturn is the only one here that's not directly connected to this particular configuration, but we have Jupiter trining Neptune, while Uranus is trining Pluto, while each of them are sextiling one another all the way around. And even at this time, we have Mars making a sextile with Saturn, emphasizing that Gemini to Aries connection. Extraordinary. Steve, you want to throw in your nickel or dollar or whatever? 'Cause I know you've been thinking about this one too.
I have, but this is where I'm going to scare the crap out of a lot of you. Because when you actually look at how far the world's come in the last 60 years, and the segregation between people by wealth, by religion, by environmental circumstances, in many ways we've gone too far, and there's no way back to some type of safe balance, at least not according to the old rules anymore. And with the development of artificial intelligence and the acceleration of spirituality, it seems that the future is going to be vastly different to what we can even conceive at the moment. And I'm going to suggest that as we get into the mid-2020s, 25, 26, 27, which these charts govern, we're going to find a way of starting to, this is going to scare a lot of you, download consciousness to start becoming more like gods in a machine, without suggesting we're going to become robots or anything like that. But it's time to start embracing the soft technology of the future, not the hard, but the soft, because without it, we're just going to go extinct. Yeah. It's time to move on into a future that's not limited by just 3 dimensions.
And I think that this is something that has been gradually occurring for decades. I remember before Jim Lewis, who was the discoverer or inventor of astrocartography, back in, let me just think of when this was, it must have been 1992, before Jim died. He gave a talk about the repetitive cycles of Neptune and Pluto, and the repetitive cycles of Uranus and Pluto, and talked about how every 4th time Saturn was in the mix, and that he saw the transition going from what was Rome and then to London as far as the power center in the world, to then to Washington, D.C. He said that there's a new power structure emerging, and that it's going to probably emerge in the Southern Hemisphere, perhaps someplace in South America. And I said to Jim, I said, I think what you're saying is really brilliant, but I think this change is even bigger than that. I think that the power structure change is moving from the physical 3-dimensional realms into the metaphysical nth dimensional realms, which is really what you're saying, just from a different perspective.
Yeah. But we're talking about a time, 18 months to 2 years down the line. We've got a lot of hurdles to clear before we get there.
Yeah.
Lots.
And the holders of the power structures in the 3-dimensional world are not going to let go, because the magnitude of the fury will continue to grow as they become more afraid of losing what they've been building for centuries.
Of course, and it's all vested interests, and it's all to do with money, and it's all to do with greed and power.
Yeah.
It's not about, from their perspective, it's power over. From our perspective, it's power in. Powerful or power filled. I'm power filled, and I want to catalyze other people into becoming power filled, not powerful, because that's just a spiral downwards into corruption and ugh.
I remember my now disembodied, passed on, deceased astrology buddy, cohort in crime, Jeff Jower. He used to say that the saying that absolute power corrupts absolutely is not correct. It's the fear of not having absolute power that corrupts. Because when you are in tune with the cooperating forces of the inner and the outer, you don't have to control, because that is really absolute power, is being in flow, in connection with that. It's the people who are greedy and trying to amass control, whether it's physical control or fiscal control, because they know that they are not.
So I've got a couple of ideas, and I've not run these by you before because I deliberately kept this back. I've got a couple of ideas that are really, really controversial, and it's going to upset a lot of people. It's going to, a few of you are really going to get upset. Right? We have to come. It's all very well talking about this in a term of okay, this is the theory, this is the potential, but what about the reality? So what if? I'm not suggesting we do this, but what if? What if, A, we closed all the churches, synagogues and mosques and turned them into community centres and said, we're not banning religion, but pray at home? What if we legalised all drugs? Within 2 years, we'd see an end to 50% of organised crime, and we'd also see a lot of people die, but then there'd be no addicts, and the world would be a much better place. And what if we banned political parties? What if we still had elected representatives who went to organise things for us, but every big decision they come back and ask the people who voted for them, what should I go do on this idea? So that would bring in a much greater degree of democracy. Now, these are radical ideas, and they won't happen, not immediately, because of the vested interest and the power money. But these are the type of ideas that the future needs to think about, because if we still think about the future in old concepts, we're lost. Now you can get upset with me.
What he said, that's not going to upset me. And I agree with you. It's not going to happen. But I mean, exactly like that, as simple as it was stated. But remember, if you were alive in the 1730s, 40s, 50s, the idea of having a government that was not run by someone who was royalty by a God-vested declaration in that person's family bloodline as being the holy power holder of authority, you would have been judged as crazy. Going back a few hundred years before that, prior to the Protestant Reformation, at least in the West, to even think about stepping outside of the church. People forget that the word Catholic just means universal. You know, there was no ability to conceive of what something would be outside of that. And I just saw this quote, maybe not all churches and mosques, but yes, all LDS. And I saw all LSD, and I went, no.
Well, one of my best friends describes himself as a recovering Catholic.
Yeah. And from every religion, whether it's Catholicism, Judaism, Zionism, Islam, whether it's LDS, it doesn't really matter what religion it is. There are stories of escaping from the quote unquote, at least in the West, the patriarchal overlording of what Blake called Urizen or Urizen, the Saturnian god of authority, that said, these are the limits, these are the boundaries, you step outside of them, and although I'm an all-loving and all-caring God, I'll fry you in hell forever. That's a loving God.
Fine by me. Fine by me. I'm not advocating.
Wait. Nansha says, what if we didn't have the world run by old white men? Now, understand that you're saying that to two old white men who absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally.
Absolutely. Take the baton and run with it. I'm tired of running with it, against it, whatever. And I think that there are a lot of people who feel like that. Unfortunately, in the United States, the Donald Trumps, the Mitch McConnells, the Joe Bidens, these people are not willing to give up the power. And unfortunately, we are suffering because of it. I don't care which one or who you pick. The fact of the matter is that the wrong people are making the laws.
Now, from an external American perspective, from someone who's watching America from a completely different perspective, regardless of the political figures in the Gestalt at the moment, it's pretty clear to me that America is now dichotomized. It's so split that it's impossible now for it to reconvene and to become a united country again. So there has to be some type of bifurcation where it splits in some shape or form in order for it to reform in a new way. And I don't think that anyone from the current political world can unite that. There needs to be either a brand new figure coming in who has no affiliation to any particular party, or certain states or certain groups of states need to go their own way and then reform in another way. Because the days of the big countries, whether it's America, Russia, China, are coming to an end. Borders are collapsing.
And there's a huge backlash that is fighting that, for good reason, that has to be incorporated into whatever this new way is. My buddy Bruce Lipton talks about how when a biological system reaches a level of unmanageable complexity, it breaks down and there's a new system that is created, whether it's the caterpillar becoming the butterfly or a single cell amoeba becoming a human being over time, that this process is part of a natural evolutionary process. And we've reached this point of complexity where, as Albert Einstein said, you're not going to solve a problem on the level of the minds that created it, period.
Well, on the one hand, astrology really is the lingua franca of the emerging consciousness revolution. It's the language which is going to revolutionize the future. On the other hand, we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. This is what happens when you look at charts in the future. You get so caught up in the possibilities that you forget, oh yeah, but we're living here now, right now, in this world at this moment in time.
I feel like the Aquarius full moon is coming on.
You're absolutely right. I was just about to launch into that one. So can you put that chart up, please, Rick?
Not only can I, but your wish is my command, oh Lord.
So on the 19th of August this year, there is a big full moon, and it's a stinker. That doesn't mean it's bad, but it does mean that there's going to be pretty big challenges around this time. Now, I didn't discover this. Penny Thornton put me onto this one. But the sun is going to be exactly opposite the moon in Aquarius, and they're both going to be exactly square Uranus, which in itself is a massive earthquake, whether it's geophysical.
The chart is there with just that aspect showing.
Yeah, so this could be geophysical in terms of earthquakes and volcanoes, and there's a good chance that will happen.
And Mercury is right there retrograde in the mix.
Yeah, it could equally be massive terms of revolution, similar to the Arab Spring. There's going to be massive unrest in various cultures and countries in the world around this time, around the suppression and the imbalance that greed makes pervasive. But this isn't all. There's also a very, very strong T-square at this full moon between Saturn opposite Venus both exactly square
The
Mars
chart
and
is
Jupiter.
there. The chart is there.
So when you put all this together, I know that in the past I've said that let's get through April and from May onwards it gets easier. It does. But this full moon is a standalone time. The last 3 or 4, 6 months have been building up to this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. But this full moon in the middle of August, 19th of August, is a standalone one-time situation that's going to suddenly rear its ugly head. And over a couple of weeks, each side of there's going to be massive changes in the world that's going to cause everyone to go, oh my God, quickly. And the stock markets are going to go ballistic here because everyone's going to panic and think, oh my God, buy gold, buy gold. Not buy Bitcoin. I know a lot of you want me to talk about Bitcoin, but I think, yeah, it's up and down. And when Uranus moved into Taurus, we all said, okay, it's the start of a new revolution around money. But it's been hijacked. It's been hijacked by the powers that be. So I think that this full moon is a really challenging point. It's going to challenge the status quo in many different situations, personally and globally. So this is the next big one that's coming up. And then there'll be more. There's always going to be more. But by the time we're into the middle end of 26, we're then going to be able to anticipate futures, both individually and collectively, with a greater degree of not certainty by a long way, but comfort than we've been able to do since we were born.
Yes. And, one of the images that I've been working with, right, let me get these aspects back so we have all of them. Well, that didn't do it. Hang on a quick second here. Aspected points, and there we go. Going back to this chart of 2026, the way I've been thinking of this, Mimi Marion says quite clearly our task is predominantly metaphysical, for it is how to get all humanity to educate itself swiftly enough to generate spontaneous social behaviors that will avoid extinction. And she's quoting Bucky Fuller. And that's interesting, Mimi, because I was going to quote Fuller, the last book he wrote before he died, Buckminster Fuller. He wrote a book called Utopia or Oblivion. And in this book, he talks about how the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the speech that Franklin D. Roosevelt gave on radio was the first time, because of technology, where tens of millions of people experienced the fear and the intensity of that moment because they heard it on radio as it was being spoken wherever they were in the world. And that he said that as technology developed with things like, the assassination of John F. Kennedy in the United States, and certainly the bombing of the World Trade Tower or the quarantine period, that he said as time went on, there would be successive waves where humanity synchronized in immediate urgent events that were either awakening, opening, or closing fearful, and these waves would get greater and greater and greater until one washed one way or another, meaning utopia or oblivion. So thank you for that, Mary. It's like that's exactly what's happening. And what I wanted to say here, and then I'll shut up for a minute, Steve. I know that sounds like an impossible thing for me, but the image that I've been using, and some of my students have heard me talk about this already, is that when you take copper, which is malleable, beautiful, it's used for art, but it can't be used for war and for anything that has a real functional purpose because it doesn't hold its shape. It's bendable, it's malleable. And if you take and you melt copper with tin, which is brittle and holds its shape, but it breaks too quickly. And if you melt the two of those together and you create a form, as it cools, it becomes what we call an alloy. It becomes bronze, which was the beginning of the Bronze Age, where all of a sudden we could make something out of metals from the earth that held their shape no matter what happened. And I'm looking at the squares of the Uranus, Pluto, of the 2010s and going back to the conjunctions of the 1960, I'm looking at the alloy curing. And by the time we get through this coming full moon and then the trines of first Jupiter and then Uranus to Pluto, that the alloy will have been created for better, not or for worse, but for better and for worse. Because you nailed something earlier, Steve. You talked about the incredible bifurcation in the United States. I would suggest that that bifurcation is everywhere. This goes way beyond political issues, although they're all political issues, because I don't care whether you're a conservative or a progressive or whether, I may care personally, but from a spiritual point of view, I don't give a damn, because whatever issues you have, you're going to fall on one side or another with people who are on the other side on other issues. Whether it's right to life / abortion, the misogyny that has the hubris to want to control women's bodies, great. But then you look at people who want to control bodies through vaccines and or through medical intervention. I'm not judging what's right, wrong here. I'm just saying that these issues are everywhere. And yet, whatever it is that solidifies out of this is not going to make everyone happy in every issue. It's going to make most people happy on one issue or another, but no one's going to get it all. But by the time we reach these trines, that's it. I mean, for a while, this is the way it's going to be for a while.
Let's just take a step back. Jupiter conjunct Saturn, conjunct Pluto at the end of Capricorn. That was end of 2019 through to the middle of 2020. We now can look back on it and say, yes, okay, that was the significator of COVID. Yes, that was one of the things. But Jupiter conjunct Saturn, conjunct Pluto.
There it is, right there. The chart is up. Go ahead.
That Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, okay, that happens every 20 years. But to conjunct Pluto as well, it brings both a restructuring and an amplification of the need for psychological change in the structures of the world we live in. Bearing in mind this took place in Capricorn, the sign of world government, I think that Jupiter-Saturn-Pluto conjunction was the seed, that it was the straw that broke the camel's back. That was the end of the political systems. It will be seen in the future as the beginning of the end of the political systems that we've lived under for 2,000 years. And one thing that we haven't mentioned yet, which is going to absolutely make a lot of you laugh, and no, I'm not going to burst into song, is that we are now finally heading into the age of Aquarius.
Well, and that is a whole separate issue because it still may be 100 years away. We don't know. I mean, we can't put a marker on it. If you look for the somewhere, give or take a generation or two or three around the birth of Jesus, where it's still, a century down the road, but 100 years either side of it is cuspal in a cycle that's 26,000 years long. So, but yes, you're absolutely, this is all resonating to a much larger change that we can't even begin to imagine. And, one of the things, Steve, about this particular chart of January of 2020, but this kind of has it here, throughout the beginning of the year. And that is that although Saturn conjuncts Pluto every 33 to 38 years, the last time it did that in Capricorn was within a week of Martin Luther making the break from the church and posting the theses on the wall of the church that kicked off the Protestant Reformation, which is as big as what 2020 was to us.
And also the last time that Saturn conjuncted Pluto, before this recent one, was in 1983, 1984. And the Saturn-Pluto conjunction was at 29 degrees Libra, 0 degrees of Scorpio. And we all said at the time, the astrologers at the time said, oh my God, there's going to be nuclear war. But it was the end of what at the time was the nuclear war race. We also saw it as a time of revolution of sexuality, but we got HIV.
It was also within a few weeks of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in late 82. Yes. And it was also the only time in the 20th century when there was a colonial power fighting a new world country. This was the Falkland Island War between England and Argentina, but it was a real war. People were killed, planes flew, bombs were dropped. That was also a colonial, struggle, just like other Saturn-Pluto conjunctions, like
Absolutely.
Simon Bolivar getting kicked out of South America, like the American-Philippine, Spanish-American War. It's a repetitive story.
Absolutely. But there have been any politician who's seriously in trouble in their own country, if they declare war, it keeps them in office for another few years.
Unfortunately.
Or am I just being cynical?
No, it's an observation. Whew. What a run. This is exciting. We can't do this every day. It'd be exhausting.
Yeah, I don't think we could do this every week or even every month, but I think we could do this every few months. Yeah. This is so where are we? We're on the hour mark. I can't believe we've been rabbiting for an hour.
Yeah. Well, hey, what do you think, Steve? We know that Pluto is, in Aquarius, but we also know that it's retrograding and it's going to just tip back into Capricorn in September, where it'll be at 29.5 degrees of Capricorn. Incidentally, my Jupiter is at 29.5 degrees of Capricorn. It'll come back to that. It'll conjoin my Jupiter for a fifth and final time. And then it'll remain in Capricorn for October and November. And in December, it'll go back into Aquarius, where it'll then remain for the next, 18 years. Now, the fact that the U.S. election is occurring with Pluto back in Capricorn than in Aquarius, does that, I'm not looking, I think trying to predict, a winner on an election, it's like being in Las Vegas. I'm not into that kind of astrology. What do you think?
I'm pretty sure that at the time of the American election, there's a very long opposition of Mars to Pluto.
Yes, there is.
Yeah. So I've done this. I did this a couple of weeks ago with Penny Thornton, and individually, separate from each other, we explored the horoscopes of America and of Biden and of Trump, and we both came up individually with the same conclusion. And it's something that it doesn't bear thinking about. But we both said that we don't think that either of these two people will end up running.
I've been saying that for about 2 years now. My students are tired of hearing me say that. And I don't get this from the astrology. I just get this from, and this maybe goes to the full moon in the summer in August, the Leo full moon. I don't know what it is, but I kind of still agree with you, although time is running out, and it may just be based upon my illusion, based upon wish fulfillment, because I'm like so many people, like a majority of people in the United States, we're basically not happy with picking, either of these two candidates if they are the candidate. But here I have the chart for the first Tuesday of November, and there is the chart, and we have that Mars, which is hanging out in that opposition to Pluto. And remember, Mars was squaring Pluto at the October 7th, 8th, Hamas invasion. And Mars was just semi-squaring Pluto just now over the last few days when Israel, Iran invaded Israel. And so this Mars-Pluto thing is not it's not an easy thing, and it just seems to be so totally active here, tied up on election day. But of course, we have that Mars just having moved into Leo and retrograding, but it is being trined by Mercury and even widely trined by Neptune. So it's going to be an interesting one.
If I were a mad fascist dictator, or something similar, or anywhere else in the world, I'd be looking at this chart and thinking, right, America's going to be really preoccupied with their election over those few days. What a wonderful time to do something risky. Mars opposite Pluto is one of the most explosive of aspects. And I don't necessarily mean explosive in terms of bombs or big bangs, but it can be regenerative, transformative, but it's always going to be sharp and incisive, and it's going to cut away all of the poison. Yeah. When you consider that Uranus in the sky is exactly opposite Joe Biden, this conjunction is opposite Biden's Mercury. Whenever I see Uranus passing opposite someone's Mercury, I always say, either you're going to be changing your mind or your mind is going to be changing.
You mean the chart for today? You mean the 21-degree conjunction?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, okay. Yeah. And
okay.
when you think that when Jupiter stands still in November of this year, October, November of this year, it's standing still at 21, 22 degrees of Gemini, right on top of Trump's sun and opposite his moon. This tells me that these two people, I've flippantly called them dinosaurs, but these two people are both going to kind of explode or implode. I don't know what the alternatives are, and I'm on the outside looking in. So I'm not really the best person to talk about American politics, especially as I come from England. And believe me, have you ever heard of Boris Johnson? I mean, our politics are interesting to say the least, but we live in interesting times.
Well, Boris Johnson is Trump Jr.
I can possibly comment, but it's all coming to the surface. It's all coming to the surface.
Yeah, and the level of holding this Jupiter-Uranus hope for breakthrough, for something happening, something's got to happen. Maybe the aliens, maybe ET will land and save us. Not a chance. They're just watching us unfold.
This is what really pisses me off. Sorry, I can't say that on a live stream. This is what really hangs me off.
You can say anything. Let me put it this way.
I'm English. I choose to try and be as sophisticated.
Steve, you can fucking say anything.
I can. And I do in private. But look, so many people over the generations, over the last 40 or 50 years, have held out for this alien thing. No. Any aliens that find us are going to want to destroy us straight away before we get too technologically advanced and threaten them. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, or any that have already found us are just hanging out and watching it unfold. Or
just put a big barrier around us at the moment. No. What if the whole idea of aliens is just a fallacy? What if, look at this, we use 23% of our brain when we're asleep. When we're awake. We use 28% of our brain when we're asleep, and we use different parts when we're asleep to when we're awake. Most of our brain is unused as far as we're aware. Now, you'd probably notice I've been going in crop circles for nearly 40 years. I know more about crop circles than most other people. My master's degree was on crop circle sociology of the community. And I've also done a lot of work on the idea of abduction of babies by fairies. I know it sounds weird, but that's part of my master's degree. So it seems to me that just outside of our range of perception, just there is the land of fairy. And there's the land of goblin and troll and pixie. And just there you've got the brownies. And just there you've got the crop circle makers. And all of these are indigenous to our planet. They're just outside of our range of perception. They've lived here a lot longer than us, and they're really hacked off with us because we're trashing their planet. And we don't need aliens. Aliens, little green men, they're here all the time. We just got to wake up and move into that bigger community that's waiting for us to join them and become a much more evolved, integrated, assimilated species in tune with the planet and all of its inhabitants. Oh, God.
And I think that this is really the larger scenario of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, regardless of what you think is out there in meta to physical, in other dimensional realms. But yes, and Natalie says that indigenous peoples of Brazil are aware of these other presences. I would say indigenous peoples everywhere around the planet are aware of these. And also many people who are, well, we're all indigenous on Earth. We're just not indigenous of where our family heritage is from. But the fact of the matter is that there's many of us, including some of us old white guys, who are totally not only in touch with and aware of these. See, here's the thing. What you're saying, Steve, is something that anyone who's done any delving into this knows, and that is that consciousness does not require a meat body to be conscious, period. We got it all wrong when we think this is who we are, and then we die, we go, and then we come back and we're here. No, we're somewhere else because we're always, then we come here, we pass through the meat bodies, and then we go back to our original state. It's not like biology created a system that was so complex that it became aware or conscious. It's exactly the other way around. Consciousness took time and manifested the physicality. And so that's why what we think and what goes on in our mental and emotional states, Carl Jung, in the last book he ever wrote was called The Undiscovered Self. He said no politician's actions are going to ever solve the problem of war. That will only be solved by the resolution of the suppressed and repressed fears in individuals. And this is basically Mahayana Buddhism. It's basically no one gets off until everyone gets off. And that is about awareness. It's what people typed before. It's about awareness.
There's no exclusiveness. There's no elite of us who's going to evolve and move into a different dimension. It's all or nothing. We take everyone with us. That's the deal.
So
see, one of the things that astrology taught me is that there's no such thing as death. It's just a transition of consciousness into a different dimension. That's all. And if there's no death, not only is there life after death, there's also life before birth, which tells me that we actually choose the moment of our birth, and we probably choose our parents as well. And the outside of this dimension that we currently inhabit, time is not a constant. There's no time in the other dimensions, not as we know it.
All the metaphysical traditions agree with the fact that linear time exists when consciousness is stuffed into a decaying or maturing or decaying meat body. Period. That once one is not in a human or in a biological organic form, that everything that ever existed and everything that ever will exist is existing. Bucky Fuller said it was like a 26-volume encyclopedia, which young people don't even know what those are. But you could pull out one volume and you could open up to one page and you could read one sentence, but the whole thing is existing at the same time.
And that's why I don't have that much time for people who are reaching out for help, like from ET or spaceships or something. They're looking for salvation. They're looking for someone to come and save us. No one's going to come and save us. Not God, not the aliens, not our politicians. We are responsible.
As long as I'm on this run of last book of Bucky Fuller, last book of Carl Jung, the last book that Sigmund Freud wrote was a book called The Future of an Illusion. And it was basically about the ending of religion, which in Freudian terms, an illusion is not something that's untrue. It's something that's based upon a wish fulfillment. And of course, dreams can come true. This is Neptune's magic. We have an illusion and we manifest it, that becomes true. But basically this idea of hoping that the mother church or the father God is an illusion that's left over from our childhood, where mom and dad basically stepped in and saved us. Now, we may differ here, but for me, ETs, fae, fairies, spirit guides, disincarnate consciousness, they're all part of the same fabric of, and I don't think that ET is any less real than any of these other forms. It's just that it's not going to come from the outside in to help us. It's going to be when the inside matches what it can hook up with on the outside. I totally agree with you there.
Spot on. And that, to bring it back down to where we started, is where the astrology comes in.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, when I picked up my first ephemeris, which wasn't until the mid-70s, way after you, I immediately thought, if astrology were taught in schools, within 2 generations, we'd see an end to warfare, racism, misogyny. Then the internet happened. And now people like you and I, we're teaching people how to do astrology in a way that I never thought would be possible.
Yeah, really.
If astrology, the politicians, the banks, well, most of the banks, the religions, certainly, they despise astrology because they know astrology teaches you to know yourself And we don't need intermediaries to talk to spirit or to talk to God or whatever you want to call it. We can do it for ourselves. And that's what astrology helps us do. It gives us a much more profound sense of security, identity, makes us aware of our own psychology, makes us aware of our own spirituality, and it helps us become better, more integrated, assimilated, and holistic human beings. I draw the line between human beings and humans being. I know it's semantics, but I'm a human's being. I'm conscious. And if everyone else were to go down what they see as their road to becoming more conscious, this planet would evolve overnight.
And I believe, and this is I'm not either an optimist or a pessimist. I consider myself a possibilist. And based upon what we've seen in this electronic digital world, we can change, because we do individually, on a dime. That's an American expression. The dime is the smallest coin. We can be going in one direction, something happens in our life, and instantly we're going in another way. We've never been able to coordinate that on a global scale because there was such a difference between William Blake and Ludwig van Beethoven. They were living at the same time, 150 miles apart. They didn't even know each other existed then. And now, because of the internet, we say, hey, it's really great that these couple thousand people are here with us today. Where the hell is here? Here is non-local. And so we've changed because time and space have collapsed in a Uranian lightning striking way that makes the technology of these times different than the astrology of our ancestors.
And one of the things I'm looking at all the live streams coming in, and a lot of people have got their own opinions, which of course is fine, because everyone's one planet, 8 billion different worlds, But the one thing that seems that's parallel with greed is anger. There's a lot of anger out there, and everyone's got their own justifications. And it's not for me to say what's right or wrong, but really anger. Although, as Johnny Rotten said, anger is an energy, but the way you manifest anger in yourself, the way you can transmute it into something really positive, you can be a sledgehammer, you can be a homeopathic laser. It's your choice. But when you get angry and resentful towards the world around you, you descend into a morass and a pit, and it's so difficult to get back out. So find a humor, folks. There's nothing that you can't laugh at, even if it's through the tears. I think we're drawing towards a close, aren't we?
Well, I'm wondering here. We said we would have some questions at the end, and we obviously could talk for a long time. We've opened up a door that there's so many things. If it feels like I've interrupted you a lot, well, I do have 4 planets in Aries and a Gemini rising, and I'm not saying that makes me right, but you have no idea how many times I've had things I've wanted to say, and my Cancer moon has said, "Shut the hell up, Rick. Just shut up and listen." So we could go for a long time, but the question is,
we will do this again. This is great.
Not tonight. I'm busy.
No. A few months down the line.
And you're in Tasmania. Hey, so are there any questions that people might want to put in the chat box that we might address?
But not questions about your personal chart.
Yeah, we can't do chart. This is not a place for what about this in my chart. Sorry. Find the silver lining. I mean, that's part of it. And people are saying do it again. Uranus will conjunct. What is that?
DT's midheaven. Donald Trump's midheaven.
Yeah.
Well, he's in court. He's in court. So
yeah,
he's dealing with authorities. So, but he's Teflon coated, so no one can say which way that's going to happen with him. There's certain things you can't talk about with astrology because you get shut down, and not just shut down in terms of right, let's stop him speaking, but you get shut down by the vitriol and the anger. And I'm talking particularly about the war in the Middle East, depending on whichever side you are on, or certain issues around American politics. There's so much vitriol and anger But as astrologers, I just don't think we can safely talk about it without. And I mean, I've had death threats when I talk about Trump too much.
Yeah. And I've also the one thing that I need to do in managing my YouTube channel is basically eliminating or downplaying or minimizing the exclusion of a polarity point for someone on one of so many different issues. I think the key thing, and you mentioned it early on, and you said the word just kind of in passing, but for me, it is like the key word of these times. And the word is bifurcation, and in fact, there's another word that's a great word that describes where we're at. And the word is dilemma. Do you know what a dilemma is? Tell me what a dilemma is. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but what's a dilemma?
To me, it's a dilemma when you're faced with two equally strong options, and it's impossible to see which one is the best.
I'll tell you what a dilemma. You're right from a standpoint of interpretation, but a dilemma is very simply two lemmas. All right, so what's a lemma? No, this is very important, Steve, because a lemma is a statement in a Greek proof. When you're saying, I'm trying to prove this line is parallel to that line, this is the origin of Greek logic, of logos. Every step along the way is called a lemma. And when you hit a lemma that bifurcates and goes in two different ways, it basically creates two parallel realities. And so a dilemma is where we are at because of this universal bifurcation of people only being able to see one of two sides of every issue that has two sides, whether you like it or not.
Do you want to hear the latest astrological in-joke?
Of course. Gemini rising, I always want to hear the joke.
So the son says to his dad, Dad, can you tell me what the meaning of the latest solar eclipse was, please? Father, no, son.
I love it. I got it. Or did you hear about the new restaurant on Mars? Good food, no atmosphere.
At which point, I think successfully leave this. This has been great, Rick. I've thoroughly enjoyed this.
Yes, and I really want to, I even though he's gone, no, Kaivan is still here, and Gail is here. Gail has been throwing up the quotes for us, picking out the ones that we wanted. When you have two lemons, make lemonade. Good one. I love it. Thank you, Gail, for that one. Gail has been sitting quietly in the background, managing these, quotes that have appeared on the screen, and that's much appreciated. And what's also much appreciated is Kayvon, who last night and I spent hours trying to untangle the craziness of StreamYard to be able to stream this to both of our universes, Steve's YouTube channel and my YouTube channel simultaneously. And so Kayvon, and Gail, appreciate both of you, and Steve. This has been great.
Done it without you guys. Couldn't have done it without you. Thank you.
And how about closing words? This is it.
Yeah, I got one thing more. Just one more thing I want to say. Encourage your children to learn astrology. Pick up the latest books. Just learn astrology, because without astrology, the world's sterile. Astrology gives you a different perspective. It gives you an insight into yourself. It gives you hope. And it gives you a way of seeing not only yourself and the world, but also the future in a way that's different to any other type of organized potential. So, keep studying astrology. It's the only thing that I feel is valid. It's the lingua franca for the emerging consciousness revolution. I am grateful to the muse of astrology. Without her, I wouldn't be here now.
When Steve and I started, we said, well, let's do some closing remarks. I said, Steve, you go first so I can say, what he said. And that's what I'm going to do. What he said. It's my sense I would step back a half a step from what you said. I would say that astrology is not the only way. I would say astrology is the most important and direct way that I've found in my life. But there are many. Matthew Fox you wrote, "It doesn't matter where you dig the well, you get to the same water." The problem is that, of course, many people choose not to dig a well. But I would say this. I would say that one of the original bifurcations biologically is the separation of the two hemispheres of the brain. And the left brain connected to the right hand, Latin for right is dexter, and to be dexterous or to be using either hand means two right hands, you're ambidextrous, because the right hand is the male doing hand, it's the logical, it's the sequential, it's the rational. The right brain connected with the left hand, and Latin for left is sinistra. And sinister is connected with the right brain, which is the feminine, the yin, the feelings, the emotions, the simultaneous processing rather than the linear processing. It's almost like the two hemispheres of the brain are the basic polarity. They're the yin yang, the male female, even space and time. And astrology is this little superhighway called the corpus callosum that connects the two hemispheres of the brain that give us the ability to navigate through this particle and wave universe by making visible that which was previously invisible. Going back to one of the things that Steve said at the beginning, it's astrology gives us the ability to see things that we didn't know existed before. And that's why I think the incorporation and use of astrology is so feared by the Saturnian structure that wants to just make everything great the way it was in some infantile past that may not have been as great as they think it was, versus those that want to just run helter-skelter into the future without holding on to any power structure. And part of what this time is about, as we move into this alloy of the cooling of this bifurcation, however it may cool, is basically working with astrology to connect these opposites or these apparent opposite forces. Like I said, what he said.
And on that note,
this is it. How do we say goodbye?
I think we press a button, don't you?
Well, I think I pressed the button, so I'm going to do that. Steve, thank you so much. Safe travels on your journey back to the to this side of the globe, from down under in Australia, in Tasmania.
Rick, a couple of nights ago, for the very first time in my life, after 60, nearly 70 years, I saw the Southern Cross. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen the Southern Skies. That's one of my life ambitions.
So here's the question. Did you play the song by Crosby, Stills, and Nash?
No.
Because the first time I saw it, I had that song queued, and I listened to it as I played that, as I saw it. Yeah, amazing.
Okay.
This guy, I mean, and looking up and seeing Orion, where's Orion? He's standing on his head. They call it the kettle, the tea kettle. It's upside down. And the moon is, the crescent moon faces the other way.
North.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, world. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you all. And I'm going to end the way that I end almost every social media thing I do. And that is think cosmically, act locally, because it does no use at all to think about these outward things, these cosmic things, these big ideas, unless we apply them in our lives on an everyday basis. Think cosmically, act locally. Steve, blessings. It's been great. And all of you for attending. And those of you who are watching it on a replay, thank you very much. We would not be here without you.